Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for Digi.City Connects virtual. My name is Chelsea Collier. I am the founder of Digi.City, and we are focusing our conversation today on digital equity in Philadelphia. And this conversation today is exactly why Digi.City was created. We created Digi.City as a way of showcasing the work that champions are doing in local communities to increase access and opportunity for people in their cities and their communities. So joining me here today is Andrea Kustis, who is the president and CEO for the Urban League of Philadelphia, and Emily Yates, who is the Smart Cities Director in the Office of Innovation and Technology at the City of Philadelphia. And it's easy these days to feel a little bit disconnected. All of the media, all of the news and things that are happening in social media, it can sometimes be challenging to find the bright lights and the good work that's happening. And I assure you that it is. And we're going to discuss a lot of that here today. So again, thanks for joining us. Andrea and Emily, just give us a little bit of introduction for those who don't know you about your role, your organization, and what you're currently focused on right now. Andrea, let's start with you, and then Emily.
And first of all, thank you for having me. So the Urban League of Philadelphia is a 103-year-old civil rights organization. And when people say, what do? I say two things: social justice, which means speak up and speak out on those issues, whether it's women's issues, education, criminal justice. And then the other piece of that is economic empowerment, because we have to be able to lift up our communities and to begin to build wealth. And we do that through 5 direct services: education in the school district with Dr. Height. We do workforce, housing, entrepreneurship, and then health and wellness. And thank you again for having me.
My absolute pleasure.
Hi, I'm so excited to be on this panel with you guys. My name is Emily Yates. I'm the Smart City Director for the City of Philadelphia. My position resides on the Innovation Management team within the Office of Innovation and Technology. And I always like to highlight that because it's a really unique team within a traditional technology department. Our goal as a team, we focus on innovation, and then the Smart Cities component is to help the city think differently about how we deliver our services. The innovation side is much more on the process, and I work on the project implementation. I started this role in October of 2019, so I'm just coming up on my 1-year anniversary.
Congrats.
Loving Philadelphia. So for those of you outside of Philadelphia, you want to check us out because this is an amazing city. My current role, what I was brought in for, was to implement the Smart City PHL roadmap, and do that by facilitating partnerships to help drive the application and implementation of tech and data. Since this is a smart city panel, I always like to kind of start with how we define smart cities here in Philadelphia, because that kind of level sets what we're doing. In our roadmap, smart city was defined as a city that uses integrated information and communication technology to support the economic, social, and environmental goals of its community. But as we have been implementing the roadmap, which was launched in February of 2019, what we're realizing is that the definition needs to pivot a little bit. And so we are starting to adjust the definition to be more about a democratic process or a human-centered process of engaging, educating, and empowering our citizens of Philadelphia to look at systemic changes throughout the city, really, and what the role of technology and data can play, but kind of falling to the backdrop. It's not the primary driver, which I think is the original kind of smart cities term, was much more focused on tech and data. And so the role of the roadmap, really quickly, is to spur innovation and collaboration around these policies and technologies, but it also is to provide a strategy or a roadmap that allows us to be responsive and not prescriptive, which is also really great, especially in times like we're experiencing right now. So we ensure that all the work we're doing is locally inspired. Philadelphia is very unique. We are a gritty city in a good way, and we are not a Silicon Valley. So we want to make sure that we retain that identity. We want to be innovative, equitable, and collaborative. We want this to be an inclusive process. And so what I've been focusing on in the past year has been to lay the foundation of governance to ensure that we are effectively communicating what we are doing both internally and externally and being efficient in that process. And then we're also setting up our pitch and pilot process, which is a critical tool that we're deploying to create a clear, consistent, and transparent process for how the city is going to engage with the private sector to test out and scale up technology and data-driven solutions to our municipal challenges. And I'm happy to get into more of that later, but that's what we've been focusing on for the past year, and it's been a really busy year. So.
Yeah. I bet, and a global pandemic to boot in the middle of all of it.
Yeah,
well, I'm really glad, Emily, that you talked about the definition and the redefinition of smart cities. And I am absolutely positive in a year, maybe 2, 5, 10 ongoing, that definition will continue to change and evolve because it reflects the cities that change and evolve as people change and evolve. So I think we can very easily get into kind of a framework of thinking about things without realizing that we are absolutely molding that. And so really appreciate your work there. So I've been to Philadelphia a few times. The Eisenhower Fellowship is actually located in Philadelphia. So that's been my entree to the city, and such a glorious city that it is. I really appreciate not only the historical narrative of Philadelphia and how important it is just to our national identity, but today, obviously, we're focused on the present and the future of the city. So Andrea, give us just a bit of a snapshot about what's happening right now in Philly, and if I can call it Philly, its nickname as a non-native. And what you see
brotherly love and sisterly affection, right? That's what I love about it. I don't know who came up with that, but I've been using it. So let's just go over a couple of stats, just so we know, what does the city look like. But before we start, I think the piece that saddens me many times, because this is a wonderful city, is that when you look at our poverty level has gotten worse over the years, right? Over the decades. So when you look now, we're at about a 26%. We have the highest level of poverty compared to cities across the board, right? That are very similar to us in size and look similar to us. And so that saddens me. And we always tout that, but it's something to be shameful to me. And it's something that when I look at this city and I look at the major corporations here, I look at foundations that are very giving, very loving, very caring. I look at nonprofit organizations. I look at the communities. I look at the ministers. We should not be at this poverty level. And so we have a lot of work to do here in this great city. So let's look at population. We're about 1.5 million, about even Steven in terms of male and females, a little bit more for females, 53 to 47%. We have 44% of the 1.5 are African American, and whites represent about 34%, and then Latinos at 15%, and Asians at 7%. When you look at, I guess one of the things I'm concerned about is when you look at adults, what I have been surprised by over the last several years is of the 1.5, and I know we have a lot of college students and so on, but in terms of married, it represents 30% of the population. So the majority of people are single, unmarried, and so on. So that has something to do with it. The piece that we should be concerned about is the median housing income is $46,000. And we have 41% of our residents are less than 35%. That's severe poverty. We have poverty, but we have severe poverty. Those with a computer at home, about 88%, and that's putting everybody together. And broadband internet service is about 80%. So that has gotten better over the last 5 years. And that's a positive thing, right? In terms of access to the service. So that's a little bit about who we are. So I think I was talking with somebody recently, and they asked me, when it comes to internet access, are we better or are we worse? And I'm going to say with this pandemic that it certainly put the mirror on the individuals who are hurting the most. It certainly showed racial inequalities. We knew it working here at the Urban League, but I think for some people it's a aha, they didn't know. And so when you look at what's going on, the majority of the people that look like me don't have internet access. We have certain zip codes, and I won't go through that, in neighborhoods that have as high as 68% do not have internet access. And I think we've already seen on news and in the paper, what Brian Roberts did in giving away Chromebooks so individuals would have devices. And we can talk a little bit down the road on, I think, the PHL Connect Ed, which was a very positive thing when philanthropy, corporate, and education got together to say we're going to absolutely go for 35,000 more homes to have internet access. That's critical. That's how you get rid of this digital divide.
Yeah. Well, one thing that has absolutely come out of the global pandemic is that the digital divide is not a conversation we can get to someday. And not to say that city leaders weren't prioritizing it and corporate leaders weren't prioritizing it, but there always just seemed to be something in the way. It was more of a long-term journey. And now obviously it's accelerated into right now. And we have all figured out how to roll up our sleeves and work together and perhaps put down the fingers pointing at each other and more shake hands and say, we have to mobilize and we have to get busy. What does everyone have? What resources do you have? And how can we put them to work? So Emily, I know you're doing a lot of work right now in the Smart Cities piece around digital access. And I think it's so critical how you've put data really at the center of all of that. So share with us your philosophy coming into your role, and congratulations on being there 1 year and just the amazing progress you've been able to make so far.
Thanks. So I think, echoing what you guys have said, in Philadelphia, we knew that these were issues, but they've really been amplified.
Yeah.
And I think they're amplified largely because we started our remote learning with schools. And so we have 35,000 students without access to internet, access to technology. More than that, of just families that don't have access. If they don't have kids, we're not actually counting them in that number, right? And so it's just been amplified. What we're trying to do is take a budget that had a $750 million shortfall this year. We had a 12% budget cut in the Office of Innovation and Technology. There are some layoffs in the city, and we're really trying to still provide the same services to the citizens, and if not improve them, and then also provide this access to technology. So pre-COVID, I was kind of just looking at what are some broad municipal challenges we have. Waste and litter and trash are always a critical component that comes up in our annual citizen survey. We launched a challenge on that. We had some great pilots from that. But with COVID and kind of Black Lives Matter, my lens for moving projects forward became, if it has a budgetary impact, if it can help us be more efficient and more effective in our budgeting process, so internal focus, or if it can provide additional information to these systemic equity issues that we're seeing in cities. So there are three kind of pilots that I can speak to right now about access. And it's, I think if we broaden our definition of digital equity and digital access, it's not just about kind of access to internet and technology, but I think it's just the broader smart city space.
Absolutely.
So our first one was with a company out of New York City called Retriever. It was initially selected as a winner of our first challenge, which was focused on waste and achieving our zero waste target. And they pick up free of charge any textile or e-waste with no contact pickup. So it was a really ideal, like serendipitous timing that we went into COVID. Everybody's home and cleaning out their closets.
Yeah.
Any e-waste additional. And so they collect it and they keep it out of the waste stream. They try to upcycle it as much as possible. And then if it's not able to be recycled, they break it down into components and reuse those components. So that's great. But what we are actually doing is expanding our contract with them to be a no-cost contract to help collect computers, provide them to local refurbishers who will then provide them to families in need of technology. And so we're working through the components of that, but that's a way that we're looking to scale up and have impact and really pivot the way that we're in the smart city space to have maximum impact and efficiency. Another project that we're working on that, I would say is not a typical smart city project. It's the work that
we want to hear about.
I'm dragging it out for the excitement. It's around spatial inequities, and we're partnering with a company, a startup called State of Place, where it's a 5-month pilot, and we're utilizing AI and predictive analytics to collect data on microscale urban design features in vulnerable and privileged communities. So we're able to do 15,000 blocks. And what we're looking at is we're taking images that the city already has access to, 360-degree images, and they're going to use the computer to scan for things like sidewalk width, sidewalk quality, curb cuts, crosswalk markings, graffiti, broken windows, all of the things that impact how we feel in a space. And then we're going to overlay that data with what we know around social economic status, access to public space, a variety of data points, and really create this rich set of data around spatial relationships between the quality of public realm and communities and how that impacts them. Because what we do know is that COVID hit communities of color harder. Yeah. And we know that that was largely in part because of their health comorbidities that they have, right? And we also know that these communities often shoulder the impact of environmental events like heat island and urban flooding. And so how can we start to prioritize how we decide on programming in these communities? And it filters to all departments, right? If we're looking at Parks and Recs, we have a great program here called Play Streets, where they shut down one-way streets in the summer and provide equipment for kids to play on. Can we use this information to really target our efforts to make people aware of this? It's a 50-year program, but they still, not everybody's aware of it. So when we know there's a community that has lack of access to good quality public space, can we actively go out and target those groups? And then can we also make adjustments to the environment in which we're turning into play streets? So are we recognizing that those are streets without trees? Well, we know that there are high rates of asthma in these communities, and trees can help remove particulate and improve the air quality. So can we also then do interventions like that? Can we use this if the city's looking to do something around participatory budgeting? Can we look at where we've invested, what the state of the public space is, and start to use that to help engage citizens in this budgeting process? So I'm really excited. We're in the early stages of that, but there's a lot of potential impact, I think, in almost every department, so the ROI on that is huge for me. And that's one of the reasons where I'm focusing on that. The other one is, I would say, a much more standard smart city project with a company called Good Roads out of Charlotte, North Carolina.
Yeah, they're great.
They're awesome. And there's so many reasons why I love this pilot, but basically it's a small device, low cost, that sits on magnetically attaches to the front of a city fleet vehicle and takes images every 30 seconds, or every half second rather, of 35-foot wide public space. Yeah. What they're actively doing is assessing the pavement quality of our streets. And another topic that consistently comes up on citizen surveys is the quality of our streets, potholes, and whatnot. And we also know that that ties to data around kind of the quality of public realm. So there's a nice connectivity between these two projects that we're facilitating as well. But in addition, Good Roads is also training their AI to look at things like street sign locations, pavement crossing or pavement quality and crosswalks, and then manhole locations. So there's a broader ROI in that sense of data that we're collecting. But it's also going to impact how streets, who has a drastic budget cut as well, is going to prioritize what streets they're going to pave. And that's a big thing because it's a very political component as well here in any city. Honestly, every city I've worked in, this has been something where the council members want their district to have more attention on this street. And can we use this purely data-driven decision-making tool to help identify what the streets are that we're putting forward as recommended to repair? But the broader thing, and what I want to create a space for here in Philadelphia, is this partnership of research and development. I want to be a living lab throughout the city. I want to be ensuring that the data that we are pushing forward has a lens of racial equity and inclusion, and really is going to impact not just the lives of people who can actively participate in the process, but who don't have a voice, who find it hard to get engaged, and that's really amplified by the digital divide. So we're trying to find ways in which to do that. But those are two right now that I'm really excited to see the results and the impact that they can have.
It's awesome. And, I've been following the smart cities in the US since 2016 with the Department of Transportation Challenge. And the themes that you are addressing are the ones that have consistently come up as people saying, gosh, I know these challenges are so complex and they're more systemic than they are point solutions, but all I can find is point solutions. How do I address all of these things which cause me to have to work between different departments? And that was actually one of the questions that came up. So thank you for the person who submitted that question, which is, I think it was actually Connect the Dots, who submitted that question, which is how do you work more efficiently and look at things systemically and as a platform, knowing that they are complex challenges, but how do you even get started? And I think that you are answering that very question by saying it's all about the data, but you have to be creative about how you collect it. It doesn't have to be, something that is a huge, expensive 10-year project. Use what you have, look to your community and understand what your community is, create that snapshot, and then engage everyone in creating some of those solutions. So just really celebrating that approach.
And I think, AI is the way to do it, right? Because what could have taken months to get data on, we can do it in a matter of days. And that's the foundation for then engaging the community. I'm not going to go into community and say, I think this is what's best for you, but can we use this and say, this is what we know the current status is. What can we do? What do you want to see to improve this? Can we use tools like gamification? We applied to NSF for a grant to develop a SimCity-esque tool to facilitate that. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we get it. But gamification is a great tool that I think is starting to become a little bit more trendy because everybody games, right? I mean, it supersedes socioeconomic status, gender, race. Everybody really likes to game. So, I think it's being creative and innovative in this space is really going to drive that cross-sector, cross-silo collaboration that's inherent to successful smart cities.
Yeah.
One of the things, Chelsea, that I would like to see us do, and I guess this is my foundation, and it's almost like a warning to us. I think a smart city provides the services and also solves problems of the community. So when I look at Philadelphia and I sit in the seat where I am, I see a racially divided city. I see a city where it's the haves and the have-nots. And so as we begin to work on different initiatives, I would like for us, absolutely, Emily, to hear from the community on what the needs are. Like one of the things that I so appreciate from the city that they did do is that you saw that the libraries, all the branches are closed, right? That's like 54 locations. And they're in poor neighborhoods and in Black neighborhoods. They were closed. You saw the other group, I forget what they're called. I think they're called T-Spot, like labs that were closed. So that's like 50. So when you look at access, where were the kids going? And what I appreciated is that we opened up the parks and the recreation centers, right? By making sure Wi-Fi is available. So when I look at the community and I say, what is it that we can do? A couple of things. One is that we need to educate our community on digital literacy. We need education programs. I know we do a lot of digital literacy here, and it's not, I know sometimes we think it's the older people. It just has nothing to do with the generation. There are high school students that don't understand how to really use a computer and all the different applications. They don't. I'd like to see us do more of that. The other piece is more collaboration with it. Like we worked last year, over the last 3 years, with the Department of Labor, and we ran urban tech programs where we were teaching typical people that you ordinarily didn't see or wouldn't have had an opportunity. We were teaching them IT skills, and all of them were getting certifications. We need to do more of that if we're going to have equity in this city. We've got to get people prepared so that they know how to use it. When I look at the internet, I look at it as once you're on it, you don't know whether I'm Black, white, Asian, Latino. So it becomes very even Steven for everybody to participate in that. So I'd like to see us do more of that. And then when I look at COVID, we know that African Americans were 2 times more likely to die from it. Why? Because we were in first line jobs. Why? Because we had preconditions, and also the homes, a lot of issues like in our homes, right? The same thing we were talking earlier about the school system and older buildings. I would like to see us do even more when it comes to the healthcare area. Right? Like when I think about how years ago if somebody had diabetes, they didn't have like the little devices that you could put on yourself to measure what you needed to measure. I'd like to see us do more with technology to be out in the communities where we go to the communities. They don't necessarily have to come to, hospitals or other areas to look at some of those preconditions and to do some work on that. I know Jefferson has a little mobile device that they ride around in, and you're able to take a blood test and get results back quicker than if you were going into a hospital. So I applaud Jefferson for doing that, using technology to make a difference in the poor community. So I would like to see us do even more exciting innovation around healthcare.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I think, 100% everything that you're suggesting would be amazing. And I've definitely had conversations around that, right? Especially around telehealth, because if you have the digital divide, again, the people who are hardest hit by COVID oftentimes don't have that connectivity or the technology to do that. So how can we provide spaces for them if we've shut our key spots down, which are our digital centers where people from the community can go in and have access to technology and computers and support? How do we start to think innovatively about how we can provide telehealth services to them so they don't have to go all the way to the ER and incur those costs and risks and stuff like that? So I think what I am hopeful for in this time of COVID and kind of the amplification of inequities in the digital space is that it will drive innovation to really have some, amazing solutions that we haven't even thought of yet to address things like how do we bring healthcare to these individuals, and partnerships that could be so unique but make such sense when we start to think about it.
Sure. What I hear and see both of you doing is exactly what I think needs to be called, which is just simply stating the priorities for the community and then opening up. And Emily, the work that you're doing in terms of capturing the data and showing the snapshot, and Andrea, the work that you're doing to really focus attention with urgency around underserved communities and say, there is no other choice. This is where we are spending our time and attention. Okay, who has what resources and how do we pool them together? How do we work collectively and then address some of these situations? Our cities don't have to be bifurcated. We don't have to have digital divides. We don't have to have inequities. We simply aren't used to telling the story as a collective because we experience what our own experience is. But again, I think just having your conversation is part of the step in doing that. And I know there are a lot of other community champions who are looking for this conversation too.
Chelsea, you're like spot on, because when I think of smart cities, and I'm going to go back when I was in Verizon for 31 years, and we were talking about that earlier, and meters and all the different things that exist in lighting. And I said to myself, way back then, if we were a smart city, everybody would have access, even to something as basic as the internet, right? We would have Wi-Fi, we would have hotspots. No matter wherever you are, you would have access. So we'll know when we get there, when there is not a difference in the haves and the have-nots. That's when we really will know, and when we really are taking care and being creative on the different services and the different things that we need for like half of our population, right? And I would encourage us, and I like what I see that the city did and Comcast did, and the foundations and the philanthropic organizations. I love that when you come together, look what we have done, Emily. The fact that you said we're going to get ready to connect 35,000 homes. That's amazing. That's good stuff. It says that we have the potential to do it. So I think organizations like my own, I think corporate organizations, we have to figure out how we do a better job of coming together to make great strides.
And if I could be so bold, I think you're doing it. We just need to support you and showcase the model a bit more.
I wish it didn't take pandemics,
right,
and protests. We had all these ingredients here in Philadelphia prior, and these are all problems, but it took a pandemic to really encourage people to look across their sector and their silo. And that's both fortunate and unfortunate. And I hope it sustains beyond the crisis.
Yeah, there are lessons that we can take away from the pandemic. And, I think I say this 10 times a day, but I never want to celebrate COVID-19. I'm not cheerleading that nasty little virus. But what I do think it is a huge wake up call. And look what we have done in just 6 months, how quickly so many things have come together. And, as I was mentioning earlier, it's always easy to focus on the negative. negative and what didn't happen, and some of the challenges there in our Twitter feeds every single day, obviously. But there's so much good that's happening. So that's always where I want to focus the conversation, at least personally, my energy. We had so many great questions that came in. So thanks to all of you who are watching and listening and supplied some of those. Stanley asked, where are we with closing the digital divide today versus 10 years ago? And then Ramana asked, what does digital access with a racial equity lens look like for Philadelphia in the future? So that's kind of a two-part question with the three-part time continuum. But how much progress has been made? And then what do you think the future really looks like? I mean, I think, Andrea, you outlined a little bit of it, but if you had the magic wand, then what would that answer be?
So I think the answer is almost like what I said before. So first of all, there has been progress. I'm going to go back, 10 years ago, and I think I know who Stanley is. That might be Stanley Green. And I look at the penetration level for the internet. And I remember looking at numbers that were like 50%, right? 40 some percent. So I'm going way back. Just look at this. I'm going way back. So we have made tremendous progress on in that area. What will it look like? How will you know? It's almost like when I said there will not be any individuals here that don't have a device, that don't have access. Mm-hmm. I don't care whether you're a senior, you've come back from prison and you're reentry, no matter whether you live in Chestnut Hill or you live in North Philly. You will know that you're looking out of it at a lens when every individual, every student has an opportunity to have access. And I can imagine when I think about that, then I think about, wow, what ties into that is employment. What ties into that is jobs. What ties into that is economic wealth. So when that occurs, it's going to be absolutely exciting. And you'll have, people that are be working with Emily, you'll have even more people that have all these innovative ideas and even more creativity because it's coming from everywhere. And we can't help but be a much better society. Yeah. And it absolutely will bring equity into the fold the way it should be. And I think it's key to drive in equity.
100%. I look forward to that day when I have hordes of people coming at me with innovative ideas and whatnot. I think until broadband access is a right and not a privilege. Agreed.
Completely. I love that future where everyone is connected and everyone has access and everyone is able. And I think on the workforce development, even though this isn't the pure focus of the conversation, we can't really leave it out, is that, the jobs of the future have not been invented yet. We will all have to be in this period of continuous learning. That is not white collar versus blue collar. It's simply the way the world is moving, and digital skills and digital equity and digital access is at the center of all of that. It is not a nice to have. It is a moral imperative that we make sure that everyone has access to move into the area of interest, into the area of prosperity. So I like that vision of the future. And I think that we have set that bar. So now our job is to join us.
Do you think it's possible, Emily and Chelsea? I know you're interviewed, but I think it's possible. I think it also starts in Washington, D.C. with policy, right? It starts at a funding level at the federal, state, and city level. In order for Emily to do the amazing work that she and her team is doing, you have to have funding. You have to decide that this is a priority and that you're going to live in a different city, a smart city. Right?
Yeah. Well, yes, because innovation doesn't stop at city boundaries, right? We need to have everybody having that access. So there's absolutely that federal level down, and kind of and driving the funding and the policy. But then we also need to have the local level grassroots up that's connecting and really taking advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah. And policy is made, of course, at the elected official level and then at the staff level. And it is ultimately us as residents of our communities and residents and citizens of the country who push all of that. And I know I'm being a little Pollyanna and speaking about the ideal, but that is how it works. So our participation in all of that and calling out leaders who are not working to convene, but rather to divide, we have to be honest about it. We can be eloquent about it and we can be respectful about it. But to your point, we have to have local and state and federal working together. And we're not going to agree, obviously, on all the policy issues.
Right.
There's going to be political divides. That is the way the system is designed, is to have that level of some antagonism. But at the same time, we have to be working for the equitable prosperity within all of our communities. It's just simply the way it has to be. I don't want to imagine a future where that is not the case. We can't repeat the mistakes of the past. So just some thoughts from me. Can't tell I'm pretty passionate about all of that. So
good company.
Yeah. So what are you all learning from other communities? Andrea, excuse me, National Urban League is obviously part of a national framework. Are there lessons learned that you're taking from your counterparts across the country?
There are, and let me just use one in particular because it's Chicago. And I think Emily is probably aware. Chicago, with all of the issues and problems that they have, right? You know, when you think about some of the sad things, the gun violence and other things, what they did right in Chicago was access to the internet. Emily, would you agree?
Yes.
I mean, they rolled out a program and they spent the money at the city and the state level that they said, we're going all out and everybody's going to have access. And one of sitting on a call with the mayor recently in one of his calls, they even use Chicago as the best that they've seen and rolling out and making things happen.
Yeah. Maybe our next Digi.City Connects will be in Chicago. We were there a few years ago in person, which was just awesome. So yeah, that sounds good.
And I'm going to check into a city in India that I was reading about. Are you familiar with that? They said it is truly like the #1 smart city in the world.
There's so much happening globally all around the country. And, you know, the focus that we always try to do at Digi.City is to showcase the best practices and list those. So again, I invite both of you and everyone who is watching and listening, send us those best practices. I mean, the platform exists to share. So all of the things that people are doing, and yes, different governments have different policies and different funding mechanisms, and there's always something to learn. But we can adjust and perhaps adapt some of those things here in the US.
Yeah, you know, I love learning from cities. That's my background. A few jobs back, I was exchanging best practices and policies between European and US cities, make sustainable and livable cities. So I'm always looking at what cities are doing and how can we replicate it and apply it to our local context here. And I would say an area that I've really been digging into as a result of the increase in data collection around COVID, but also the protests and kind of the recognition of algorithm bias and the impact of that, and surveillance conversations, especially around the protests and whatnot. I'm seeing with a lot of my peer cities, at least in the US, the conversation rising around the development of data privacy, surveillance policy, developing that. And so that's where I've been kind of digging in, and it's not my background. I am not. While I'm a smart city director, data is not my background, and surveillance. So I've just been looking at a lot of best cities and their best practice, like Smart Columbus, and the facial recognition policies out of California. So that's been a really hot topic among cities, I think, as they're realizing things like in San Diego, where they deployed their smart street lights, and they had to shut down that project for a little while because of issues with providing access to the police and not effectively communicating what they're trying to do with that. And I think it's really important that Philadelphia, moving forward, has an internal policy that outlines what we are willing to do, how we deal with data, how we destroy data, how we store data, all of those things. And so that's an area where we've really been looking, because we understand the impact on our community and the concerns our community might have. We're really looking to get that right. But again, it's an iterative process that, similar to just smart cities in general, is going to constantly be evaluated and rewritten.
Yeah, and I think it's important too that we as leaders in this space communicate to everyone, public, private, residents, nonprofits, academics, that this is an iterative process and that there's no like a magic answer that everyone is 100% glued to.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to say, look, these are the challenges of our times. We don't have the silver bullet, one size fits all, but we care about this and we are going to be intentional about it and we are going to listen to your thoughts and your fears, and we have to have space and create space for a respectful conversation around it.
Yeah, nothing is static right now.
Right.
Definitely. And
so Emily, just a question, because I don't know the answer to this and you just brought it up. So within your department or within that area, are there individuals who will look at something like facial recognition and say, oh, here's the good part of it, here's the bad part, here's a concern we have, this is when we should use it, this is when we should not use it? Are there like policy research folks within that area that are responsible for that?
No, not that I'm aware of currently, largely because we haven't deployed anything like that. We do have some cameras, and that was a very much we shared that information. It was at the request of the community around safety concerns in certain neighborhoods. So the police do have surveillance systems, and the city helps support that. Sure. But we haven't deployed anything otherwise. And so I'm trying to get out ahead of that and determine, do we have should we set up a task force that is comprised of internal and external experts that when a project hits a certain kind of metric, it automatically triggered and goes to that task force to assess the responses to algorithm bias or how, whatever it is, but ensure that we're having experts at the table that are doing it and that there are experts that are representative of communities, but also the government. So if that's all in the process of being developed.
Yeah. Okay. And I love the idea of a task force of experts because they're wanting to contribute in a positive way to the conversation. It's not just about an RFP. And then, thinking about San Diego, we can look to them and say, okay, it was so exciting back in 2016. It was the world's largest IoT-based network, but maybe all things weren't taken into consideration because it's all evolving and changing. So we have to be honest and patient with ourselves at the same time and say, okay, there will be challenges that develop. There will be things we hadn't considered in the most thoughtful way because there is no crystal ball, to use a trite phrase. But how can we anticipate some of that and then support each other when those things do happen? How can we come together and say, look, this is the lesson that I learned and I can apply it here. What lessons have you learned and how can we all support each other? And, I know the focus of the conversation obviously today and rightfully is in Philadelphia, but there are cities all across the country who are facing very, very similar challenges. Of course, not identical, but similar. So I'm always just encouraging us to showcase the best that is happening in our communities, which you are absolutely doing and doing a brilliant job of it, I may add. And then look to other communities where we can learn and we can share. So we have just a couple minutes left. These minutes have flown by. Yes, Andrea.
I have a question to you because you've had an opportunity to see a lot of different cities in the United States, right? Have this dialogue. Yeah. And I think you gave us a few things, but if you look at just the smart city, what we need to do, how we need to do it, what advice would you give all of us here in Philadelphia if you were to say, boy, here's two things that I would say to you, just pay attention and make sure you're doing this as you grow and become a real smart city in all the different areas? What would you say to us?
My answer, surprisingly, has nothing to do with technology. It's actually about how different organizations come together. I've seen it happen in the US and around the world. And the great news is that you are both champions in each of your sectors, so you can bring others along, but it's going to take the startup sector, and it's going to take the private sector. It's going to take your academic community and everyone coming together virtually in a room without the political conversations. It can't be about who's jockeying for resources and who upset somebody however many years ago about some issue that is probably still super important. There is just no time for that. And the needs of everyone in our community are very front and center. So there has to be space, agency, and willingness to come together and say, here's what I can give, here's what my sector can give, here are the priorities, pick 3 of them, start small, move fast, and just be humble in how we solve these problems. We don't have time for anything else. So whenever we're sometimes kind of confused because it's a technical issue.
You just closed us. I think that was an excellent close.
No.
I really do. It was very thoughtful.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Well, I appreciate both of you, really, your time and just the work that you're doing. It was no accident that we were very deliberate in choosing both of you, as we need to hear the stories and the actions from champions in communities in the U.S., and you two are at the top of the list. So thank you very, very much. Thanks to everyone. Sorry I didn't get all your questions, but thanks everyone. And please share this. As you've heard things that are inspiring to you, tweet them out. We'll make sure to include all the tags from our presenters, and please share the good work. There's a lot of it going on. So have a great day, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.